You're looking at some of the damage caused by George as it came ashore early this morning. The area surrounding Van Cleve and Pascagoula, Mississippi bore the brunt of this storm. Winds in excess of 100 miles per hour showed no mercy on the area. Meanwhile, parts of downtown Mobile, Alabama are still underwater. George having dumped at least 10 inches of rain, flooding the city. Heavy rain continuing to drench that Gulf Coast area tonight. Hello and welcome to this special edition of Weather Center. I'm Mike Bono with the final episode of Hurricane and now Tropical Storm George starting out in the eastern Atlantic. Let's take a look at the track, and this is one of the longest tracks you'll ever see. Finally making final landfall, we hope, in the Gulf coastal area of Mississippi this morning. Now just still 25 miles north of Biloxi with max winds 70 miles an hour along the coastline. And that is the advisory as of 4 p.m. Central Daylight Time, drifting north slowly with the estimated pressure 975 millibars and not quite 980 millibars yet, even at in Mississippi. Now let's take a look at the watches and warnings. We have a new image for you on this one, and we could see that those watches are now just tropical storm warnings. We don't have any hurricane conditions anymore, as it's now a tropical storm from Grand Isle, Louisiana to Destin, Florida, including Mobile Bay, parts of Alabama, Mississippi, the Sounds, Lake Borgne, Lake Pontchartrain. Still tropical storm warnings displayed as we see the effect, the widespread reaches of our storm system and some heavy rain. And right in the middle of that, and he's been there for a while, Jim CANTORE has been braving the storm in Mississippi, most recently in Gulfport, which was almost ground zero this morning. Jim, it looks like you're still getting blown around a bit.
Yeah, we are, Mike, and believe it or not, we're actually protected a little bit from the wind down on the beach here. There's some higher winds off to my my north here a little bit. You can see how the wind is blowing the tops of the trees around, and also some of the debris that's left over on the ground. Now this is US 90, and it basically parallels the beach. And this road was underwater earlier on today as the storm moved on through. It didn't take much for the ocean to break right through these silt fences and just overwash the road, so it was virtually impassable this morning. But we did come down and shoot some video of it, and we'll show you some pictures in a half hour. But right now I want to show you an area that really got nailed by this system, and that is Pascagoula. They took the eastern side of the storm, the eastern eye wall, the most powerful part of the hurricane. Look at these waves, unbelievable here. And remember, this area is protected by a barrier island too, so this is all surge. Some of it preliminarily estimated at about 12 to 15 feet, but of course they can't estimate it until later on. Boats in the bay, some of them unfortunately banging against each other, some of them banging against the dock. Two not so good things for the boat owners there, as the waves, no doubt, and the wind have definitely caused some big problems. We've heard of tremendous tree limbs, power lines down in Pascagoula, and obviously they're without power as we are here in Gulfport. As we look at Mastcam, though, signs of better times ahead for this area as we see the ceiling beginning to lift and the mid-level clouds appear, and we may even have a nice sunset, Mike. So after being virtually wet for 2 days, I know I'm looking forward to that as well, and I'm sure the people here are. But it will be a long time before this area gets all cleaned up, especially down East Mississippi, an area that got hit as hard as they did, perhaps even with Camille. Back to you.
All right, thanks, Jim. And indeed, we have what you have been dealing with for several days, and that is the tropical storm now, George, moving inland. Southern central Alabama going to be dealing with rain here, I think, for a couple of days. Behind me, the state capitol building here in Montgomery, the flags on top of the dome up there, starched pretty much. I'd say winds up on top of the hills around Montgomery here, maybe 20 or 30 miles an hour. Down here in the city, it's really not all that windy. It gusts at times. But it's really the heavy rain which is going to be the problem. If it persists and George hangs around here for a day or two, then we could be talking about some serious flooding problems. But several inches of rain already here, no reports of any major flooding. One big concern is isolated tornadoes. We've already been in a tornado warning about 45 minutes to an hour ago. The sirens went off here in the downtown area as a funnel cloud was sighted a little bit farther east in Montgomery County. Fortunately, nothing materialized here around the city, but it does look very dark and ominous, and it is very warm and sticky, very tropical, as you would expect in the middle of this circulation around the tropical storm. So we'll stand by here. Looks like it's going to be one wet night, that is for sure, in central Alabama.
Well, thanks a lot, Jeff. And as you're saying, it doesn't look like it's anywhere near over in central Alabama. That's Jeff Morrow from the Capitol Building in Montgomery, Alabama. John Hope, our tropical expert. We're looking at heavy rain and the flooding that goes with that as one of our chief considerations, and also the severe weather, too.
Those two items are together are the most concerned now. The storm surge, well, it's still above normal, especially east, say from about Mobile Bay on east, but still the heavy rain and the potential for heavy thunderstorms is the greatest concern.
Now, Montgomery County not under a severe weather or a tornado warning right now, but we do have a tornado warning in northern Barber County, and a lot of these echoes, in other words, that's at least the second time today that Barber County's been in a tornado warning. Just north of Eufaula, a possible tornado. They just keep on coming. These spiral bands are bringing in these thunderstorms off the Gulf of Mexico.
And they're going to keep on coming far into the night, so we're not anywhere near over with that aspect of the storm. Also, we would point out while we have this radar up here that we do expect these to kind of spread eastward into farther east in the Panhandle and into southwestern Georgia, so folks there had better be on their guard too as the night wears on.
In fact, north of Dothan, Alabama, northeast, there's already an intense storm. It looks like it might be moving up with some severe potential. We're looking at that tornado watch in Mississippi and Alabama and parts of Florida. And as you were saying, that might just get extended further eastward into Georgia.
Very likely it will.
Folks really need to take care in that part of the Gulf Coast for severe weather. But 53-mile-an-hour wind gusts still at Jackson is the highest on this list.
It's interesting that that wind persists up there. In fact, Jackson is almost out of the rain area. They're just getting a little light rain and northeast wind, but it's stronger wind than any other station's reporting in the last couple hours.
And I think this wind field has detected the center of yours. Very little wind right there.
Very little wind indeed. It's pretty calm around the center, but and that center isn't moving very much. 3 miles an hour is a very slow pace for a tropical system.
Yeah, and with the relationships we've seen the last couple of days, that could mean 30 or more inches of rain.
Well, that's what does concern us, and we've been saying that for the last couple of days. We're afraid this is going to be a very slow mover. And the only reason we bring that out is the fact that it can just continue to rain over the same area and get a tremendous amount of accumulation, and that is just exactly what's happening tonight.
Some 24-hour accumulations we've seen show up on this graphic. The pink area is coming in at 12 or more inches in parts of Florida. Now, since 8 o'clock Eastern Time, 7 Central, we see another pink area near Destin, Florida that comes in at 8 to 10 inches. So about 20 inches of rain shown in that area already.
And that's kind of verified. We had a report late this afternoon from Milton, Florida, reporting Forestry Service measured rain 25 inches for 24 hours.
In 24 hours, so,
Correct.
And more to come. We could see our radar, again, with those repeater echoes, very, very heavy, that flood threat. Now, we have some certain issues that we're looking at on the Gulf Coast. The impact will be more in certain areas than others.
Well, the storm surge is winding down, although we're still looking at 2 to 5 feet in some areas. Our main concern, again, as we mentioned, severe thunderstorms and rain. This whole area I just outlined there, subject to considerable amount of rain in addition to what's already come down.
So we go from the coastal or saltwater flooding into some freshwater flooding now, and the flood watches are out in many of the southeastern states, and this is serious business. You want to stay away from this water and even go to higher ground if there's somebody you know. That might be necessary, and keep the kids and pets away from those flooded areas. Don't drive into any very deep water areas either. We're looking at a really serious flooding situation right now.
And it could go from flash floods eventually to river flooding, very likely will.
And that'll extend over even more days.
A longer period of time.
John Hope, thanks a lot. We're looking at, again, the last hurrah, if you will, of George, as it's now a tropical storm, but it could be the worst one for many as flooding takes over in the southeast United States. If you're away from your TV set and glued to the internet, it's weather.com for all that you might want to know in the area of weather. Now back to the studio with more.
Thanks a lot, Mike. We do have some severe weather going on along this frontal boundary. It's been rumbling in Hickory, North Carolina, where a car dealership was damaged by a tornado. But otherwise, there's a look at Tropical Storm George, and that's the biggest trouble spot across the country, but also some rough weather in the nation's heartland and the southwestern part of Kansas, and some wet weather in the southwest. We also have an upper level low. It's just spinning. It's been doing so all day around the San Francisco Bay Area, but not enough to bring an abundant supply of Pacific moisture in. Most of it has been offshore.
Right now, it's your local forecast on the Weather Channel.
A tornado warning is in effect now for residents of Auburn, Alabama, as thunderstorms rotate around the remnants of Hurricane George. Good evening and welcome to this edition of Storm Watch, sponsored by Home Depot. I'm Dave Schwartz. We lead off with our tropical update, which shows you the latest information on T.S. George. It's been a while since it's been a tropical storm, and we believe that we've seen the last of Hurricane George. But just because the winds have died off down to 55 miles per hour or tropical storm status does not mean that the threat to life and property dies with this thing. There's a lot of rain, and once again, tornado watch is in effect for parts of Alabama, Florida, and Mississippi, and a tornado warning is in effect for Auburn and vicinity in east central Alabama. One thing that we'll have to keep a close eye on the next couple of days: more flooding. That's going to be the major weather story across the country here with specific regard to George, is the heavy rain. Rainfall totals. Look at this. Over 20 inches of rain here just east of Mobile, Alabama, and out here into the western Florida Panhandle. Tremendous rains here too in southeastern Mississippi. In New Orleans, we got off easy because the hurricane center remained to our east. We got some rain last night, this morning here in New Orleans, and it's still windy, that's for sure, but the heaviest rain has been near the center and to the east, where the winds are coming in out of the south. So if you live in Alabama, you know what's going on here in southern Alabama and the western Panhandle. And once again, in these lines of yellow in particular are thunderstorms. Here we are in Auburn, Alabama. These thunderstorms are rotating toward the north and northwest, and that's not quite the direction that you look for thunderstorms. You might see some thunder out to the southeast and say, oh, it's beyond us. Everything moves from west to east. In this case, not true, because the low center is right here, and the winds are flowing in toward the low center, so winds are coming out of the south to southeast. That's where these thunderstorms are coming from, and if you need to take evasive measures, do so. Get to the lowest floor of the building in which you find yourself in the Auburn metropolitan area here tonight. And we could see some spin-ups, some weak tornadoes out of any of these cells in these lines as they spiral in around that low pressure area in behind me over southeastern Mississippi. And notice how slowly it's moving. Can't even tell it's moving at all. That's why the threat of more severe flooding continues over western Florida Panhandle, southeastern Mississippi, virtually all of Alabama, and then working into southwest Georgia. We've had some strong thunderstorms here in southwest GA, and those will be moving into Columbus and then up toward Atlanta and LaGrange later on tonight. Elsewhere in the tropics, there's only one other piece of news, one other tropical system, and that's this one. It's a pretty powerful storm too. It's no longer a storm, it's a hurricane, and it's been that way for a while. That is Hurricane Jeanne. 90-mile-per-hour winds, moving northeast at 21 miles an hour, and these are the Azores Islands, and this may have a tremendous impact on them. By that point, it'll be moving swiftly. They'll get a lot of wind, they'll get some rain, but nothing like we're getting from our slow-moving tropical storm here in Alabama. Elsewhere in the United States, well, there's some warm, moist air streaming into the plains, a trough of low pressure with some drier air in behind it. And even though it pales in comparison here on our radar image, some isolated severe thunderstorms are developing here and in South Dakota. There is a severe thunderstorm watch in effect for parts of Kansas. Not over to Kansas City yet. Clark County in southwestern Kansas has a severe thunderstorm warning right now. These storms don't look to be very, very healthy or vigorous, but this area will need to be monitored for hail and damaging winds and also some locally heavy rain. But look at that. 10 inches or more. We'll have the latest, very latest on George next.
Tropical storm George continues to pelt central Alabama with drenching rains. I'm Jeff Morrow, and I'll have a live update next on Weather Center.
This program was sponsored by the Home Depot.
Home Depot is like 5 stores in one.
Home Depot's like... It's been a day of damaging wind and flooding rain in Biloxi, Mississippi. At one point, winds gusted over 100 miles an hour. Mobile, Alabama was also hard hit by what was Hurricane George. Folks there saw upwards of a foot of rain, causing widespread flooding and winds that uprooted trees. And the Big Easy was virtually a ghost town as George came on shore, but residents there dodged a bullet. New Orleans saw heavy rain and some wind, but was spared the bulk of George. And we have continuing coverage from the Weather Channel Forecast Center this evening. We'll have expert analysis from John Hope, also live team coverage, and we do have some tornado warnings to pass along to you in Walton County in the Florida Panhandle. Around Dufuniak Springs, possible tornado moving north at 45 indicated by Doppler radar. And for those of you in the Auburn, Alabama area in western Lee County, look out around the Roxana area. There is a possible tornado there moving northwest at 25 indicated by Doppler radar. Just one of the many factors we're still dealing with. Although it's now a tropical storm, it's still very dangerous as George continues to move very little. Nearly stationary, winds now 55 miles an hour. It is just 20 miles north of Biloxi, and actually it's dropped a little farther south over the past couple of hours, and we'll be watching that very closely. And if you're plotting at home, 30.7 north, 89.0 west. Winds are at 55, and that's dropped off 15 miles an hour since the late afternoon advisory. That's a good thing to see, as the pressure has increased just a bit. We still have tropical storm warnings up for the Gulf Coast from Grand Isle all the way over to Destin. That includes those of you in the Lake Pontchartrain area, Metro New Orleans, and across the Mississippi Gulf Coast where George came on shore earlier today. We've got live team coverage. Kristen Dodd has been covering the system overnight and today from Mobile, Alabama. Jim CANTORE is in Gulfport, Mississippi, and Jeff Morrow, the Weather Channel's Jeff Morrow, was covering the inland aspect of this storm from Montgomery, Alabama. We'll start with Kristen tonight in Mobile, where the weather is at least getting a bit better. Right, Kristen?
Well, gradually we are seeing a bit of improvement, but still it's a very soggy night here in Mobile, Alabama. We are in the downtown area, and even though we still are seeing some very gusty winds and the steady rainfall, we are beginning to see some of the storm surge begin to move back into Mobile Bay. And take a look behind me here at the museum across the street. You can see the sandbags there piled up against the door. Well, when we got here this afternoon, those sandbags were under about 2 feet of water, all of that from storm surge that moved on earlier this morning. You can see on this video that we also had storm surge spilling out near the Adams Mark Hotel. A lot of it was up into the parking ramp, and cars were stranded. At times, the water running into the cars. We also had several trucks stalled throughout the day, and those had to be towed out through the afternoon hours. But as I mentioned, things are gradually beginning to improve. I want you to take a look at something. This pole behind me, that is where the water level was when we first arrived. It has now retreated a good 20 or 30 yards, and it looks like it's going to continue to do so as our winds continue to slacken off just a bit. We also are seeing some improving conditions in Gulfport, and Jim CANTORE joins us now from there.
Thanks a lot, Kristen. Yeah, unfortunately, too, here, wind and drizzle and light rain just continue to compound problems tonight. And as you look behind me, this isn't a joke. You don't see much because we still have no power here in many, many areas, even though before we left the hotel to come down to the beach, which is where we are right now, we did quickly get power back. All right, let's go ahead and take you to Pascagoula, one of the areas hardest hit today. And this is, of course, this morning when the tremendous wind and waves moved on. And this is all surge. This is all surge and wind waves. Estimates now about 12 to 15 feet with this. So no doubt beach erosion, potentially if you've got a home on the beach there, some structural damage, no doubt, and a lot of water on the roads. Now this is, of course, a no-no with the boatage. You don't want to park your boat too close to the next guy if you're going to anchor it down, nor do you want to leave it in the dock. That's one of the worst things because of the rise and fall of the water. This is probably the best case scenario where the boat just sits out there anchored down strongly and holds down the storm. But what you're not seeing is, of course, potential structural damage, tree limbs, power lines, trees down in Pascagoula, which is one of the hardest hit areas because they were to the east of the center. I'll tell you, there's something very, very humbling about being around with hurricane force winds and having that power go out. And tonight looks like another night without the power. At least we don't have the hurricane force winds. As Mike mentioned, we are covering the storm from the inland sections, Montgomery, Alabama. Jeff gives us a live report. Good evening, Jeff.
Good evening, Jim. And again, we're getting a lot of the rain that you've been dealing with, you and Kristen, for several days. Not coming down all that terribly hard. We've got the wind picking up a little bit here. You might tell that I don't have the hood up now, so the rain really not coming down all that terribly hard. But earlier it was coming down extremely heavily. Some thunder and lightning, which you don't often get in the tropical system, but a little bit in some of the outer bands. We had some tornado sirens going off here in Montgomery. That's the capital behind me, by the way. But things have quieted down here a little bit. We're expecting, of course, as more of George continues to slowly move onshore, we're going to get some heavier rain. One thing I did want to mention is we were driving down here from Birmingham, Alabama today. We passed, had to be at least 50, 60, maybe 70 power equipment trucks that were coming down from the north. And when I read the sign on the side, it was from North Carolina. So some of the neighboring states trying to help out here, all those trucks headed south to try to help out and get that power restored down to where Jim CANTORE and others are, down along the coast where some of the winds were the highest. But just as I said that, I better get the hood back up. The rain's coming down hard again. Let's get back to you, Mike.
Okay, Jeff, no doubt you'll be dealing with the rain for quite a long time there in Montgomery. The Weather Channel's Jeff Morrow tonight in Montgomery, Alabama. Again, the storm is not moving. That means more rain and the risk of flooding. Let's bring in our hurricane expert, John Hope, here in the Forecast Center. And John, we've just gotten another tornado warning in for southern Tallapoosa County in east central Alabama, indicated by Doppler radar until 8:30. Look out around the Dadeville area. It is now just east of Thornton. So one of the byproducts of George continues to be the fact that it is spinning up twisters tonight.
Those are the two elements we're concerned about, still the heavy rain and also now the severe weather.
And we've been following the system for 10 and now 11 days. And what do you make of that? Is this one of the systems that you've rarely seen that lasts this long and affects so many land areas?
Well, the answer to the second part of your question, I've seen them last a long time, but I have not seen very many affect that many land areas. As a matter of fact, most hurricanes that come over the area where this one did, when it hit the Puerto Rico, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba, never survived. This one did.
Yeah, the fact that it maintained its identity with those 10,000-foot peaks in the Dominican Republic is amazing enough, and then was able to reemerge and intensify again.
Unfortunately, it never did get quite as strong as it had been before it got to Puerto Rico.
But nonetheless, we're seeing quite a bit of damage. Beach erosion, power outages continue. Let's take a look at the satellite perspective. And John, as you mentioned earlier, although the bright color here in the infrared indicating the higher or colder cloud tops is dissipating, that certainly doesn't mean that we're out of the woods yet.
Well, I wouldn't read too much into that, because you don't have to have the tops up that high in a tropical system to get heavy rain, and still plenty of rain falling out there.
But we are fortunately getting a fair amount of dry air wrapping behind the system on the western flank in New Orleans, and that has certainly been the saving grace for the Big Easy. However, the winds are still a problem this evening, even back in the interior in Jackson, Mississippi, where we've seen some of the higher wind gusts over the past 4 or 5 hours.
That's the highest gusts we see on the chart right now is way up at Jackson, Mississippi. They're entirely even out of the rain area, which is kind of surprising.
And is that because the thunderstorms are kind of transporting some of that energy down from the mid and upper levels?
Well, not many thunderstorms out there. This is just a gradient, I think, at Jackson. This cooler, drier air moving in up there.
Let's take a look at the radar now. This is really going to be probably the big story, because the winds are beginning to ease off, but the rain is not. And we've seen the hurricane, or I should say now the tropical storm, if you look close enough, John, it looks like it may actually be jogging back towards the coast. Should we be concerned with that?
It may be a little bit, but I'm going to have to watch that for a little while before I get too concerned about it. I'm not going to think it's going over the coast unless I see more movement than I see now.
And the rainfall has certainly been a problem so far. We've had reports of up to 25 inches of rain in Milton, Florida. Pensacola, you've had up to 10 to 11 inches of rain, and Mobile's had 12 1/3 inches. And you can see those feeder bands, and these are the bands which have been kicking off those isolated Doppler-indicated tornadoes.
And they'll continue to do that all night long.
And that tornado watch will continue in effect through the overnight hours and into probably a good part of Tuesday. They'll likely extend that.
I'm afraid so.
Okay, the Weather Channel's John Hope here with some analysis. We'll keep you updated throughout this evening here at the Weather Channel, and of course, we'll have more live reports from Montgomery, Gulfport, and Mobile through this evening. Of course, if you're away from your TV set, check us out at the Weather Channel online service at weather.com. Now back to the studio with more on the current weather and your Tuesday forecast.
All right, Mike, thanks a lot. A reminder that this Weather Center is sponsored by Lowe's Home Improvement Warehouse. Well, we've got weather elsewhere in the country to tell you about. A front that is pushed off the northeast coast, trailing back here to the south. And with this, we've had a bit of wet weather here through the Carolinas, also into parts of Kansas, where, as a matter of fact, we have a severe thunderstorm watch in effect. We saw the watch here to the south, the tornado watch, but you could also see some rough weather here and a little bit.
It's been a day of damaging wind and flooding rain in Biloxi, Mississippi. At one point, winds gusted over 100 miles an hour. In Mobile, Alabama, it was also a rough day. Hurricane George hit them hard. Folks there saw upwards of a foot of rainfall, causing widespread flooding and winds that uprooted trees. And in the Big Easy, it was virtually a ghost town as George came on shore, but residents there dodged a bullet. New Orleans saw heavy rain and some wind, but was spared the bulk of the hurricane. And we're continuing our coverage here in the Forecast Center at the Weather Channel. I'm Mike SEIDEL. We'll have live team coverage. Also, we'll talk to Stu Ostro and get some analysis of what's going on with George tonight. Still a lot of problems out there. In fact, we have tornadoes now on the ground in Okaloosa County in northwestern Florida. Flash flooding continues across the Gulf Coast to Mississippi, Alabama, and the Florida Panhandle. Let's give you the latest from the Hurricane Center. Just in a few minutes ago, the latest coordinates and the winds have dropped off. They're down to 45 miles an hour. The storm, though, is moving south-southeast at 5 miles an hour. 5 miles an hour, and that has us certainly watching the movement very closely, because that is a direction back towards the water where it could strengthen. Pressure's up to 985 millibars, and it is now near Biloxi, Mississippi, which is right on the Gulf Coast. As far as the warnings go, there your tropical storm warnings now, they've been dropped west to the mouth of the Mississippi to Grand Isle. They continue up from the mouth of the Mississippi and then along the Gulf Coast all the way over to Destin, Florida. We're still getting wind gusts with some of those squalls up to 70 to 75 miles an hour across the Florida Panhandle. And we have live team coverage to get you updated on what's going on from the Gulf Coast. We have the Weather Channel's Kristen Dodd in Mobile, and we will go to her first and find out what's going on right now as far as the water, which has been receding, which is some good news.
Well, and it continues to be good news, because every time we come back to you, we are seeing some of that water recede. The water being from storm surge that came up Mobile Bay and out onto the downtown streets here in Mobile. You can almost even barely even can't even see it. It's just still over what is called Water Street, so it's still about a block farther inland and out of its banks. But this afternoon we were looking at it being all the way up here by this coast, and so definitely some improving conditions as far as the storm surge is concerned. However, look around me and you can see plenty of heavy rainfall, and the winds have picked up in the past hour or so, very gusty. Actually, some of the worst conditions that we have seen throughout the late afternoon hours. Earlier, the flooding was the big story here along the downtown area and along the bayfront, as we saw cars even being submerged, strong winds and damage throughout the area, trees down, awnings off of hotels. So a big mess here in downtown. A lot of cleanup will have to be done. But as far as what is going on tomorrow, it looks like the heavy rain will continue to exacerbate some of the river flooding. Not the storm surge, but in the rivers. All of the runoff will begin to flow into the rivers, and those are going to be rising out of their banks, and we could see more people have to leave their homes. Already tonight, thousands are in shelters in and around the Mobile area. Now let's join Jeff Morrow, and he is in Montgomery, Alabama. Jeff?
Hello, Kristen, and indeed we are looking at fairly tranquil conditions, to put it quite honestly with you, here in Montgomery. The rain has really backed off. Just now, as I'm talking to you, we're starting to pick up just a little bit again. I was checking out on the Weather Channel radar, and it looks like we're in between a couple of those heavy bands. Actually had somebody come over and tell me that in the eastern part of the county it was raining very heavily, but when they came here, the rain had really slackened off. So Montgomery, at least the city itself, is in between the bands, but that's probably a very temporary thing, and then as another band comes in, it'll start raining heavily. And it's really the rain that they're most concerned with here in central Alabama, because we have the potential with a very slow-moving tropical system to get several inches, maybe as much as 5 to 10 inches of rain here, and that would definitely cause some flooding problems. We will definitely keep you advised from here in Montgomery. Right now, let's go to Jim CANTORE. Jim?
I'll tell you, tonight again here in Gulfport, Mississippi, very, very little in the way of lights. I can look around 180 degrees and not find a single light tonight, as complete darkness is in this area right near the beach, which is where we are right along US 90 tonight. So big problems continue with the power outages. Finally a break from the heavy rain and wind, and this is going to allow power crews to get out and slowly readjust this power. So at least some good news there, but the damage has been done. There's a tremendous amount of devastation here. Tree limbs are down, power lines are down, And of course, people's lives have been totally thrown up in the air. And even tonight, people living in shelters once again cannot return to their homes. A curfew continues till 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. So hopefully things will be improving, but no doubt some troubles with all sorts of rain and flooding, and that's going to continue right into tomorrow. A big thank you going out to the crew that's joined me for nearly a week now here. Blair, Simon, Craig, and Brian. Couldn't have done it without these guys, and no doubt it doesn't make it any easier to come down here and deal with the rain and the devastation anytime that I go out to see these things. So all across the Caribbean and across the states, I hope that we get our lives back in order. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, Jim Cantore from Gulfport, Mississippi tonight. And the good news about this entire event is the fact that so far we've had no reports of any loss of life here in the U.S. of A. Unfortunately, not the case in the Caribbean, but it sounds like a lot of you out there who are watching the Weather Channel heeded the warnings and the evacuations and took safe shelter. Let's get an update now from Stu Ostro, our meteorology supervisor. No fatalities, that's good news, but a lot of cleaning up to do as devastation is widespread. Power is still out and the rains will continue.
Yeah, it'd be bad enough that we have all the cleanup that's going to have to go on, but it makes it that much more difficult when the storm is simply not moving away, and so the weather remains bad.
Let's take a look at the satellite imagery now, and then we'll go right into the radar and show you how much rain has fallen and deal with the situation now in Okaloosa County where the tornadoes have been sighted on the ground. But still dry air coming in on the backside of this tropical storm now. We're still getting a lot of moisture feeding up into the Florida Panhandle and into southern and central Alabama.
And even though we don't see a lot of the reds and oranges and yellows that we did last night at this time, these blues are extending high enough up in the atmosphere to support a lot of moisture, a lot of heavy rain, and with winds in the lower levels of the atmosphere coming in from the south and southeast, and then a little bit higher up out of the southwest, that is causing the potential for tornadoes to spin up, and we've actually had some reports very recently too.
And you can see the gyration of the rainfall all the way up to Montgomery and Birmingham, but basically it's not getting any farther north than I-20 this evening. Some of those severe storms now moving into western Georgia, and we do have a new tornado watch in effect until 1 o'clock. 11 o'clock in the, or rather 10 a.m. in the morning, 10 a.m. Central Time, 11 o'clock Central Eastern Time for those of you in Georgia. We'll show you that graphically in a minute. First, though, we want to take a look closer at the radar in the Panhandle of Florida. And this is the area where we have the possible tornadoes, and actually we've had some spotted by a storm spotter, several small tornadoes during the last 15 to 20 minutes. Now they're racing north-northwest at 20 to 40 miles an hour. And they were moving also onshore near Fort Walton Beach. So a lot of rough weather in this part of Florida tonight.
Yeah, this batch of cells right in here are ones that we're perhaps most concerned about, but really any of these squall bands here out well away from the circulation center will have torrential rains and the potential for not only very gusty winds, but also a tornado here and there.
And this particular cell here around Fort Walton and Destin looks particularly dangerous. That's going to be heading up towards Crestview.
Yeah, and with a gust of 80 miles per hour at Herbert Field, that just goes to show you the sorts of conditions that can occur with these storms as they move north and actually northwestward.
Why don't we take a look now at the estimated rainfall on Doppler radar, and you can tell us what we're looking at here, Stu.
Well, first, a little geography. Here's the Florida Panhandle, Georgia, Alabama. What's remarkable about this is the very sharp cutoff right here. This is a little different than the radar we usually look at. It actually estimates the amount of rainfall that's fallen, and we see here estimated maximum of 29 inches, and we've had reports of close to that in here, so we don't think that's an overestimation. The hurricane moving up like this, places over here, hardly any rain.
And this is the area where we're watching those big cells right now producing more torrential downpours on an area where you've already had 2 feet of rain, so you can imagine that there is a lot of localized flooding. In fact, we've had many reports of secondary roads being underwater tonight. Also, that tornado watch, let's show you that graphically now, and it has been extended throughout the overnight hours. Also, the flash flood watch is continuing through the overnight hours. We don't have the new tornado watch yet updated. We'll get that to you as soon as we can, but again, that covers basically the same areas as you see here, but it does extend into parts of southwestern Georgia, and again, that's up till 10 Central, 11 o'clock Eastern in the morning.